Okay, I literally just finished filming the C-Log 1 tutorial and I checked my phone and Canon just released the version 1.3.0 firmware for the R5. It offered C-Log 3, so now that is redundant. I might put it in the video somewhere, but yeah, here's a video about the new firmware 1.3.0, especially targeted towards C-Log 3. Basically, in this firmware, there's like a bunch of updates, but the two most important things are now you have C-Log 1 as well as C-Log 3, so you have like two log settings. And second, you have 8K RAW Lite in addition to 8K RAW, so you have smaller RAW file sizes. And in addition to that, we have a bunch of random updates, plus some FTP transfer updates for like server workflows. Don't worry about that, and some bug fixes. Basically, in this video, we're just going to be focusing on C-Log 3. Alright, first, let's talk about the stats of C-Log 3. It offers 14 stops of dynamic range. So C-Log 1 offers 11 stops, C-Log 3 offers 14 stops. That basically means that you have more shadow and highlight information to retain. It gives you a more pleasing image. You can see like more of the highlights and more of the shadows and all of that. And one confusing thing about this is like there's actually a C-Log 2. C-Log 3 is actually between C-Log 1 and C-Log 2. C-Log 2 has 15 stops, but the shadow is very noisy and very difficult to grade. And C-Log 1 has 11 stops, so it has less dynamic range. And C-Log 3 is actually in between C-Log 1 and C-Log 2, offering at 14 stops. The shadow is much easier to deal with, and I've actually tested this a little bit. It's actually really good. Next, C-Log 3 has a base ISO of 800. Yeah, C-Log 1 has a base ISO of 400, but because of all that dynamic range, they need a higher base ISO to lift up the shadows to retain, right? So the base ISO is 800. So basically that means if you're shooting anywhere outside, you pretty much need an ND filter for C-Log 3. Now the specs are all out of the way. Let's show some like comparison footage so you guys can see like what's the difference. So first, let's test the dynamic range between C-Log 1 and C-Log 3. And here's what it looks like. Next up, skin tone. The C-Log 3 skin tone is a big upgrade from like the original color because it's very unified. It's all like one yellow color, and then the light rolls off the skin very nicely, and I really like it. But after seeing C-Log 3, C-Log 1 is not even close. Okay, so C-Log 3 skin tone is so much better, especially that because the skin tone always falls at like the 70% of the brightness levels. Because of the higher dynamic range, C-Log 3 actually retains a lot of information in the highlights, which really benefits the skin tones. Third, the file size. I haven't noticed a big increase in file size. It's all like pretty much the same. 1080p IPB settings for C-Log 3, 5.64 megabytes per second, and for OLED it's 16.07 megabytes per second. Not a big increase. If you're familiar with shooting on C-Log 1, it transfers. It's the same thing. And lastly, let's talk about my experience just shooting C-Log 3. I think this is the most important part. On-set monitoring is a pain in the ass. I'm filming this right now on C-Log 3, and I can see in the monitor, like I'm completely blown out, but it's not overexposed yet. Later, if I bring that into Premiere, I can actually like lower it down. So I'm not actually overexposed, but it looks very unpleasant when you're filming it because the lighting is like all messed up and you're viewing something that's like super bright, but in reality, it's just on the right exposure. So it's like very weird and very messed up. And more about skin tone. The skin tone looks a lot more red. C-Log 2 is like this wax color where it's like all yellow. It looks very unified, but it does look a bit like waxy. C-Log 3 retains a lot more of the natural red glowing of the skin, which some people might prefer. I don't have an opinion, it's just a difference that I noticed. The fourth thing, if you lift up the shadows of C-Log 3, it looks a lot more crushed than C-Log 1. I feel like C-Log 1 deals with shadows by just like setting it at a gray value and they're just like calling it a day, while C-Log 3 basically like still tries to match the black points while raising up everything else. So that's like also something I noticed. I think this means that it's much easier to grade because when you lift up the shadows and stuff, you don't really want a black point to move. You just want the shadows to be moved up. So that is also something that you should know about difference between like C-Log 1 and C-Log 3. The last thing I want to note is that C-Log 3 really has a lot of noise in the shadows. In this comparison, you can see on the left, this is what it looks like if you don't like expose to the right. And on the right, this is me trying to like overexpose it without clipping. And if you look to the shadows, there's a massive difference. Even like if you look anywhere else, there's a massive difference in the color as well as the noise and dynamic range of these two shots. So if you're shooting C-Log 3, make sure you overexpose it, but make sure you don't peak. That's the proper way to expose C-Log 3. I only had like an hour to test this, so this is barely like a very comprehensive review. So if you like it, I would really appreciate it if you guys can consider subscribing and also checking out our other contents on this channel. And if you want to see like productions shot on the R5 and with like C-Log 1, all of my like school stuff are shot in this picture profile, and you can check it out here, I think. Yeah, anyways, if you like it, subscribe. Bye.